Hello, everyone. I was just talking in chat, and then the countdown finished. So here we are. That is my bad. Thank you so much to everybody who has already been in the chat and talking. I want to open by saying that I feel fine and I'm back to work. I'm doing stuff, but I still have a little bit of a lingering cough. I'm going to try to cough away from the microphone, but if you have a sensory sensitivity or hearing a cough is going to be distressing to you, just be forewarned. I'm really sorry if it happens. I'm going to try my best to avoid it, but with a live stream, things can happen. As always, if you're not already familiar with these streams, my name is Mike. I use they and he pronouns. I was one of the designers of Daggerheart as an additional designer, a freelancer. So I don't work for Darrington Press full time, right? I worked on this project. These streams represent just my personal opinion on and thoughts about the game of Daggerheart. I'm not speaking for anybody else here. We're using the Creators Guild, community gaming license for Daggerheart that you see here on the screen that I can now go away because it's been on there for a while. We're going to talk about making adversaries for the Witherwild campaign frame. The Witherwild is one of the campaign frames that is in the core book. It's the one that is in the SRD, which means that it is approved for us to make homebrew and kind of commercial material for, right? We can publish Witherwild adventures. We can publish Witherwild adversaries and environments and things all within the CGL as is. And so that's why we're focusing on that setting. Also, I am running 2 games in the Witherwild, so this is going to benefit my own game, right? I'm doing the fun thing of this public stream is also sort of prep for games of mine. So that is fun. I'm getting some double, triple duty out of this. Thank you so much to folks who have followed and supported the channel in the last week or so. So that's Edward, Mr. Fruit Punch, NSman, Dorkside VO, who's here in the chat, and Blackheart Bry or Blackheart Bree, all followed in the last week. Thank you to all of them. Thanks for being here, Machine Age Productions, to Dorkside VO, and everybody who is watching live and folks who are watching video on demand later on. As of right now, live, my Daggerheart GMing seminar that is running this weekend has 1 spot left in it. I decided to have there be 10 seats to begin with, and there is 1 seat left right now. Just trying to pull up the page. Oh, this is the wrong section. The Start Playing Games interface has changed a little bit recently, and so it's throwing me off a bit here. There we are. Thank you for your patience. That link should go to my seminar, Mastering GM Skills for Daggerheart. This weekend is going to be 2 hours. I am going to be presenting material largely based on questions and topics that people who are attending the seminar have asked for. And then I'm going to add some core material that I think is important to cover. And then there will be time for additional Q&A. So if there is still a spot, you can sign up and join us this weekend. I am going to be offering this seminar again. The fun thing there is that each time I do this, it's going to have different material because people are going to have different questions. Also, people who are members on YouTube and subscribers at patreon.com/MichaelRUnderwood, they said, writing down that link, patrons at the $3 USD level and up, plus those subscriber members on YouTube, are going to start getting access to private streams. These are going to be at least once a month, and they are going to be more freeform, right? They're going to be very audience Q&A driven. I will try to bring in a topic to talk about kind of as a default. But if you can't make it to the seminar or the price there doesn't fit kind of your current budget, then there are going to be other opportunities to go focused Q&A with me on top of these streams, which will remain free, right? I do these, they're public, they go on YouTube, they're public there. So that's all the lowdown there. And thank you to Dorkside VO for subscribing with Prime. I really appreciate it. I've also been told that my audio is still low, so I'm trying to keep my energy level up and stay really close to the microphone. If you are watching and find that my audio is drifting down, please let me know if you can. I appreciate it. I'm doing what I can to try to keep these levels up without feeling like I am shouting, right? I have neighbors. I live in the middle of the city. I'm trying to balance being a good neighbor and being able to be heard by all of you. So that is a bunch of preamble and setup. Now we are going to jump over to this page. Oh, wrong thing. And I'm going to start by sharing with you a 2-phase boss monster that I created for an adventure that I am developing in the Witherwild setting. If you are a player in my Monday night game, don't watch. If you are a player in my Tuesday night game, this will be familiar to you. If you don't want to be spoiled on this adventure at all, maybe watch another video, but a lot of stuff is probably going to change between now and between when that is published, because that adventure is at most the second big project on my list to self-publish in terms of Daggerheart-compatible materials, because Bastion of Hope is already in development in terms of art and layout and working with an editor and things like that. So stuff is going to follow after that, and the rate of that release is also going to depend on how much other work I'm getting, right? I had the Impossible Creatures stuff based on that Kickstarter. I'm talking with people about other Daggerheart projects, Daggerheart related, Daggerheart compatible. As those things come in, that work, which may be NDA'd, may mean that other stuff is going to come out more slowly, but patrons will continue to get the kind of inside track and early look at things. So this Hive Eater is a 2-phase boss monster. They are classified as a solo, but for this, I really want to encourage folks to think about this is one main enemy, and then there's some stuff around them, right? In the battle point system, one solo is probably not going to be a whole fight worth of challenge under that system. This enemy is built to be the challenge in a set-piece battle. If you watch the Age of Umbra miniseries on Critical Role, there are a couple of enemies throughout that miniseries that are in that big boss monster paradigm that I'm also using here. So keep that in mind. This creature is called the Hive Eater, and the idea here is that a big anteater was warped by the Witherwild and made even bigger and mutated and reached the size and power that it started consuming swarms of insects and other kind of pests in this part of the Fanewick wilderness. And that as it grew and as it changed, it reached this powerful stage where it could, if left untouched, if unchallenged, make an attempt to overthrow and replace one of the faint divinities. The idea that I'm going with here, which is just my interpretation of the Witherwild setting, is this idea that faint divinities are made more than born. Some of them may be born to become divinities, but other creatures could gain power, attract magical energy, and then like overthrow a faint divinity and take over the kind of domain, not in the Daggerheart 9 domains of the game, but like magical divine domain. And so this Hive Eater is designed to be a creature that is on its way to becoming a pretender to the throne of one of these faint divinities. First thing that you'll note probably is the fact that this is a withered adversary. I've added the withered tag to their type just to put it front and center. It's bolded here. Structure-wise, this adversary uses a lot of the same structures. This is just the default as laid down in the core rulebook that we see in the SRD. I don't doubt it, Smendon. I have actually not really dug into the Malazan Books of the Fallen. I did not find that they were to my taste. I know a lot of people love them. I'm very happy that they're popular, just not something that I was able to stick with as much. But I did get to meet Steve Erickson at a convention. It was very nice, very smart, and so I don't doubt that there's cool world-building stuff going on in that series. So this is a Tier 1 adversary, but it's a big deal kind of foe. We have a basic description here, their motives and tactics. Something to think about with motives and tactics is this list is also kind of a safety net for improv with an adversary. If you're using an adversary out of the core book or out of some supplement, official or not, if you look at motives and tactics, you can use those as inspiration for other moves or actions that this adversary takes that aren't already spelled out in a feature. Right? So convert pests is this idea that the Hive Eater consumes pests and then controls them, warping them to its own will. Defy reason here is meant to suggest that this creature is warped by the Witherwild and doesn't necessarily operate like a normal animal. Consume? Well, consume what? There's any number of things that a magically mutated monster could consume. You might find in your scene, none of these features feel like exactly the right thing to use in the moment. So I might look to motives and tactics. One, to decide if I'm going to improvise something, I think about the motives, or I look at the tactics parts, right? Convert pests is kind of both a motive and a tactic. But I might go, oh, rampage. Well, what's a move I can improvise that is a rampage? So when you're building adversaries, this motives and tactics section is also a way that you can do a little bit of really condensed design and prep work for yourself. You're thinking about who is this creature or adversary as a person, right? In the world of the story, this is a being that has its own will, its own motivations, its own goals. How does it approach those goals and what is it motivated by? Those go here. Difficulty is that default difficulty number that any roll against this adversary is going to use unless something says different. The damage thresholds here for this adversary are 8 and 15, which is pretty high for a Tier 1 adversary. It's not the highest you might see, because I do want the adversary to take damage. This is a multi-phase enemy. If you don't get to see the second phase, you're not getting all of the fun of what this design has to offer. You'll see that I had like 2 of 8 and 3 of 4. That's because this comes from a prep document, and when I'm running games online using prep like this, I just, instead of marking HP, I use these like they are countdowns, right? It has 7 of the 8 HP remaining, rather than marking HP up from 0. So that's just a little explanation of how that works. This form has 8 hit points and 4 stress, and an attack bonus of +3. A +3 attack at Tier 1 is really high. This adversary is most likely to hit most of the time, and that is part of the build that I'll get to in just a moment. Their default attack or standard attack is a claw swipe with a very close range, right? They can attack beyond just melee. And then they deal 1d10 +3 physical damage anytime they hit with that standard attack. They have 2 experiences, Tremor Sense of +2, because this is a burrowing enemy, and Predator of +2. That Predator experience can be for attacks, for trying to like find a hidden player character, right? They're Predator, they hunt. I like when I'm building a adversary that is meant to be kind of a solo leader or major threat in a scene, I probably want to give them at least one experience that they can use when making an attack as an extra way for me to spend some fear and put my finger or my thumb on the scale to make an individual attack more likely to succeed. Blackheart Bry says, I ran a dragon fight in Daggerheart Tier 2, used the standard Daggerheart solo suggestions and added some servants, but it didn't feel like a real solo battle with the dragon, so this monster makes a lot of sense. Yeah, right, a lot of stuff in the adversary design changed over the course of the open beta, if you kind of look across those documents. And so what different types of adversaries do and how everything is put together, right, there's been some changes. That's why I wanted to flag, this is my design intent with this particular adversary. This encounter is not built using the battle points system, right? This is a bespoke, specific encounter to be the climax of an adventure module. Okay, this adversary has a bunch of features. In fact, I have to scroll, right? Beyond momentum, they have this survival instinct feature, but that's just the phase change feature, so we'll come back to it. An adversary that is meant to be the only foe or the biggest foe in a set-piece fight, you probably want to give them Relentless. Relentless is a feature that says that this adversary can be spotlighted more than one time in a GM turn. The Ravenous Predator phase has Relentless too, so instead of being spotlighted one time per GM turn, they can be spotlighted 2 times per GM turn, but you have to spend fear as usual to spotlight them, right? If I get a GM turn because of a player character rolling with fear, I get 1 move automatically without spending fear. But if I wanted to use that Relentless after activating the Ravenous Predator, I would then spend a fear, right? That's what this phrasing means. As DM Rawlings mentions, there are a lot of features on this adversary. If I were designing a standard type adversary, or even a lot of the other types, I tend to try to limit the number of features to limit the cognitive load on the GM, because if a GM is running 3 or 4 different adversaries and they each have 5 features, that's 20 features to keep in mind, which is a lot. If you are running a boss or like super solo and they have 7 features and the only other thing that you're using in that scene is maybe like a summoned minion or something that has 2 or 3 features, that's a total of 10. That's a lot more manageable than 4 adversaries with 5 features each for 20, depending on how you approach the game, right? Different people operate different ways. With this adversary, I felt okay giving them a longer list of features, especially because that survival instinct feature has only one particular use, right? That just signals the phase change. It's not something I have to think about throughout the rest of the fight. A good idea that we see in the boss fight in episode 2 of Age of Umbra is giving your set piece boss, villain, whatever, a movement oriented feature, so they are able to traverse the battlefield or the scene more readily, right? That it is harder for a player character to get away from this main enemy. That lets you maintain pressure even if a character is trying to like disengage a little bit to be able to heal or pull out, like kind of step back from the front line of fire. You might have a feature that lets you pressure them still. You don't necessarily always need to be pressuring every PC. You know, you don't have to go, okay, well, I hit the ranger first, and I'm just going to focus the ranger until they make a death move. That doesn't necessarily make for the most interesting scene. But having a feature that is movement-oriented gives you that flexibility to be able to pressure almost any player character. Yeah, a dragon, a tier 2 dragon with 8 features. Make sure the allies are not too complicated to run. That sounds pretty good, Phoebus. So these are both passives. They're just kind of rules that this monster operates by. Now, there are 3 actions, which is a lot for one adversary, but I wanted to have variety in how this adversary operated so that it didn't just turn into, okay, cool, they move up at you and claw swipe, and then they claw swipe again. One, in descriptions, I'm going to add variety where claw swipe is the name of the standard attack, but it's not always going to be described just as kind of the swinging of claws in, an overhand kind of way. I'm going to vary that as well. Earth eruption. You can see where my thinking came from because I didn't change the name on this, right? This is from the Acid Burrower. I modified. I may have modified something in here. Actually, we can go to the SRD and just compare the feature to see if I actually did change it. Earth eruption, very close range, make an agility reaction roll or be knocked over, becoming vulnerable until the next act. So actually, I just copied this directly. Right? I have an enemy that burrows, and when an enemy that burrows bursts out of the ground, the effect is probably going to be pretty similar. So that made it easier to do. What I did change is that the Hive Eater doesn't have to mark a stress to do this, while the Acid Burrower does. So that's one of the ways that I made this enemy more powerful. I took off that stress cost limiter so that this adversary could do other things. Part of that is because I added a different stress cost feature. DM Rawling says some features are more complex than others, so I try to take that into account too when determining how much a GM can handle as well. Hello, Gryffindor wins. Glad to hear that your travel went safely. The combination of first time in chat and someone speaking in a way that seemed more familiar was confusing. So it's understandable that this is somebody who mostly chats here under a different name. I have a sense of who that might be, but I don't want to guess incorrectly and make somebody feel bad. So Earth Eruption, it's just a stronger, no-cost version of what the Acid Burrower does. The next feature is Lashing Tongue. Spend a fear to have the Hive Eater whip its barbed tongue at all targets within close. All targets within close is a lot in Daggerheart, right? That's a big radius. Each target within range must make an agility reaction roll or suffer 2d8 plus 3 physical damage. So I have to spend a fear to do it, but I get to target everybody within close. However, whether they take damage is on them because this is a reaction roll. So the characters that are more agile are more likely to be able to avoid it. Characters can add experiences to their reaction roll or other features that give them bonuses on reaction rolls in order to be able to avoid this. Additionally, Lashing Tongue does not count as an attack because it is a feature that creates a reaction roll, and then the character succeeds or does not succeed against a reaction roll, and a reaction roll is not an attack. That is important because this adversary has momentum. When this adversary makes a successful attack against a PC, you gain a fear. This adversary right now is built such that Lashing Tongue does not activate momentum. Part of why I did that is because Lashing Tongue has such a big range, and if I had 4 PCs that I'm fighting against, and I used Lashing Tongue, the chances that all 4 of them would succeed on that reaction roll against a difficulty 14 at level 1, it's not too high. And so then every time I used Lashing Tongue, I would get back that fear that I spent. And I don't necessarily want to do that here. Hello, Knights of the Last Call. I also do not use Twitch Mobile very much. Cardboard Enjoyer, hello. I'm glad that you could catch the stream. Cardboard Enjoyer asks, are there many instances where a player can choose between 2 reaction roll options, or is it usually limited to 1? A lot of the time, a feature will say what trait is required for the reaction roll. When I am GMing, I will often say, make a reaction roll. This trait is probably the most straightforward, but let me know if you have another approach that you want to make. Or I will say, make a reaction roll. Tell me how you avoid this threat, challenge, problem. So this is a little bit of a discretion rulings over rules thing. If a feature gives you the trait, it's really straightforward to just use the trait that's listed. Yeah, I think giving some options is fun because that also lets the players express the character's approach via the way that they try to avoid challenges. Now, sometimes people will take a high trait and want to use that for everything, and we want to push back against that some of the time while still being fans of the characters. So there's a little bit of a balancing thing. Smendon asks, would you pair a solo with an environment rather than other adversaries? Almost a lair action. I did, in fact. When we get to phase 2, I will talk about the environment that I built to help make this overall encounter stay dynamic. I did not write a specific environment for phase 1. I wrote it to go with phase 2, and I'll explain that a little bit later. So to round out talking about these features, Trunk Club is the last action option here. Spend a fear to have the Hive Eater grab a tree and make an attack against a target within very close. On success, the target takes 2d10 plus 4 physical damage. Right, so that's 2d10 plus 4 instead of 1d10 plus 3. It is more than twice as much damage, probably. But it costs a fear to use. Knight's Last Call says, I only worry that the pacing of something like a massive eruption AoE could be offset by 4 players all advocating for why they're using trait X. That is a great catch, right? The more characters you're asking to make a reaction roll in a given moment, if you give them that latitude, it will take a little bit of time. Outside of a combat where something like Lashing Tongue is just one beat in the scene, in a scene that is like a traversal environment, I might give that latitude, because what that creates is it creates a moment of spotlight for each of the characters on how they respond to a threat. When that threat is a little bit more straightforward, like this tongue attack, it might slow down the game a bit more to leave room for those exceptions. Phoebus says, I'm using environments in almost every encounter, either something specific to the adversary if a solo, or a generic environment based on the setting, forest, swamp, grasslands, etc. Fantastic. I'm so overjoyed by how well the environment's design framework has been received by folks engaging with Daggerheart, because it was one of my favorite parts of the game that I touched in a big way. And so it makes me very happy. Right. There's no right answer, of course. There may be something that feels right in the moment. And in that case, you are probably well advised to follow your gut, right? We want to keep the principles and best practices in mind, and then operate on that based on the best of our judgment. Very glad to hear that your flight went smoothly, Knights/Derek. I wish I could go to more conventions. I used to go to a lot of conventions. As my gaming stuff ramps up, I may find that I'm able to travel to more. I've done PAX Unplugged, but haven't made it out to PAX West or East. I'll be curious to hear from Derek, from you and other folks, how much there is to do in the world of tabletop at a PAX West or a PAX East at this point, if I'm recalling the event in question correctly. Journey type environments. Interesting. I have not watched that video. I I tend to use traversal environments for trips, but that kind of wing or plank of environment design is something that I've been working on myself, building on what is already in core, right? The traversal environments in core are maybe a little bit less set up already to be that journey type environment, right? They tend to be a little bit more contained, right? The Raging River itself, not a cross-country journey. I have built some environments that are that more journey-oriented thing, but that's kind of outside of the scope of this this stream. PAX West will always be PAX Prime. That's fair. Yeah, I've been to PAX U 3 times now, and it has a lot of the things that are fun about Gen Con, but the crowds are so much smaller, and I feel a little bit less overwhelmed, a lot less overwhelmed much of the time. And it can be easier to meet up with people at PAX U just because it's not quite so gigantic. So we have that Trunk Club, right? This is a special attack. If you have like a Guardian or a Seraph in your party who's really heavily armored, or a character that has really focused at level 1 on their damage thresholds, and you want to be able to put some more pressure on them, that Trunk Club attack, right? That's the button to go and push for a bigger attack. If you're looking for some variety in running a boss adversary like this, telegraphing a Trunk Club attack is a great way of doing a soft move. If a player rolls a failure with hope, I get a GM turn, but I don't necessarily want to make as hard a move. I might say, right, your blade kind of skips off of the tough hide of the mutated anteater, and in response to your attack, it reaches over and rips a tree from the ground and raises it up above its head. That's a soft move. I am telegraphing future trouble. But if that's the only move I make in that GM turn, when I pass the spotlight back to the players, that person who just acted can be like, oh, I don't want to get hit by that tree, and then try to do something about it. You can also use something like the slow feature that is in, that some adversaries in Daggerheart have. So the huge green ooze at tier 3 has slow, and then a couple of, I think the Cave Ogre and 1 or 2 others also have that. Hey, Pathfinder PhD. Yeah, right. The streams that I do, right, I tend to just try to talk through my process, and internalizing the design paradigm and philosophy of Daggerheart is a process to kind of to work through, depending on what your background is with other TTRPGs, right? I came to the design team for Daggerheart having already spent a lot of time working within a Power by the Apocalypse, Force in the Dark type of design philosophy, brought that to the team. There was already stuff operating within that space. So, right, I've done my adjustment in how I think about adversary and scenario design some time ago, but Daggerheart has its own particularities, and even I, having worked on the game, am still developing and refining my thoughts and iterating on ideas that I'd had. So my hope is that the game will continue to grow as both official material comes out and as folks working within the creator communities develop additional design technology. Alan Tucker says, creating adversaries for Daggerheart is much different than other systems like 5e and Pathfinder 2, for sure. Absolutely. Folks should, if you have not already, check out the Impossible Creatures Kickstarter campaign that Alan ran and I did some writing for. The campaign is over, but there's going to be ways to order the book. Just go check out the Kickstarter page. Alan has direct experience on that, working on the project. And this is fun for me because I played a lot of 5e and I played a little bit of Pathfinder 2. I did not GM a ton of either of those. So I'm coming to Daggerheart adversary design with a different like history and experience. What I'm trying to do with these streams and as I like, publish stuff and think about things is to take as much of my 5e knowledge as I have and keep that in mind as I'm designing in order to be able to better orient folks who are coming from that background to the best of my ability. Struggling with what not to include. Yeah, right. If you compare a Daggerheart adversary stat block to the stat block in the kind of more, so some of the OSR games have like really small stat blocks, but what they focus on, in my experience, is a little different than how stuff works in Daggerheart. But if we're looking at something from 5e or Pathfinder, there tend to be a lot of individual details in those stat blocks that don't tend to have their own mechanical space or manifestation in Daggerheart, because Daggerheart tends to be a looser game. And so the thing to think about if you're going to be converting, right? And I did a stream on this where we did some of that conversion, is what elements are most important to put into words to specifically flag so that then a GM using this adversary understands or can get a sense of them that is strong enough to fill in the rest. Thank you for posting a link, Smenden. And I'm seeing people announce, more and more Kickstarters and campaigns for Daggerheart-compatible material, which is very exciting because I know that there's a lot of hunger, especially for adversaries and adventures and things like that. And I'm working on some myself, but I'm only one person. Fortunately, I can work with other people on certain projects, which is great. So, our reactions for Phase 1. Suborned Swarms. When the Hive Eater takes severe damage, mark a stress to create a Withered Swarm, which emerges at melee distance and takes the spotlight, right? This is a summon ability. I will show you the Withered Swarm stat block in a couple minutes. We had Momentum, right? Whenever this adversary makes a successful attack against a PC, you gain a fear. This summon ability being reactive means that it is a way to create dynamism in the scene. If the Hive Eater has taken severe damage, 3 hit points is a meaningful amount when this phase has 8 hit points total. This Hive Eater Phase 1 could only ever create 2 swarms, because if it takes severe damage and then severe damage again and then severe damage a third time, it's already in a phase change. And if it were hit like that, I would probably skip the swarm and focus on the phase change. But that's just my personal preference. And then our last feature here is that phase change. When the Ravenous Predator, this Phase 1 version, marks its last hit HP, it retreats, trying to return to its burrow. Replace it with Desperate Monstrosity, which takes the spotlight immediately, right? Desperate Monstrosity is the name of the second phase. And your players have just landed a big blow. They prompt the phase change. Because the new phase now gets to take the spotlight, you're able to break up some of that momentum that the player characters had in kind of knocking the adversary out of the first phase. This lets you get a little bit more of that back and forth, and it lets you signal the fact that the Desperate Monstrosity is trying to return to its burrow, which I'll talk about in a moment. I want to jump down to Withered Swarm. This is a slightly modified giant mosquito horde adversary. I added the Withered tag. Most everything else is different except one thing. I'm going to pull up the giant mosquitoes stat block and then explain my thinking here, because it's very particular to the Witherwild as a campaign frame. Giant mosquitoes say, Bloodsucker, reaction. When the mosquito's attack causes a target to mark HP, you can mark a stress to force the target to mark an additional HP. The Withered Swarm says, I didn't replace the name because they used to just be withered mosquitoes. When the swarm attack causes a target major damage, you can mark a stress to force the target to instead take severe damage. When a PC in the Witherwild campaign takes severe damage, they have to take a Wither token, right? There's that special mechanic. And so this Bloodsucker is designed to be able to make a player character go from having to take major damage to severe damage. Here's a trick that I'm pulling with this design. I hit a PC with the Withered Swarm for what would be severe damage for them. They mark an armor slot, and that drops down to major damage. If I want to be a jerk, I can then use Bloodsucker, mark a stress, and push it back up to severe damage. This adversary is designed to be able to push towards severe damage in order to try to apply Wither tokens. That's why I have this slight tweak in how the design is applied. So, jumping back up to our Phase 2, Hive Eater Desperate Monstrosity. Their difficulty went down. Their thresholds went down. They have more hit points, the same amount of stress, same attack. Their basic attack deals more damage, and they have the same experiences. Relentless went up by 1. They still have Burrower, and they have a new passive, Contagious Wither. Any target that marks HP from an attack by Desperate Monstrosity must make a strength reaction roll or take a Wither token, right? This is a unique boss enemy where a big part of what they are is mutated by the Witherwild. This lets me make the fight more dangerous and emphasize the mutation element of the Witherwild as a distinction within the setting. You mark any amount of HP. So it hits you, you use armor. If you still mark HP, you have to make that reaction roll. In the version that, in the fight that I did running this for some of my players, nobody had to take a Wither token, but they were very scared of it. And so it did what it needed to. Burrowing Dive. This is a little like some other features that exist, right? The Hive Eater rapidly digs an escape tunnel, descending a very close distance and then moving forward a close distance. This Burrowing Dive is a great move to make when you do your phase change. If you're emphasizing that the Hive Eater is trying to escape, you describe the change and then have them dig and try to get away. When I did my phase change, I emphasized the fiction by describing the Desperate Monstrosity form as being this Hive Eater rapidly mutating because of the Witherwild, which then signals stuff like the Contagious Wither and some of these other elements that it has. Eruption is slightly different here. This is digging up to make an attack against a PC, and it makes them mark a stress if you hit them. And on a failure, the target is knocked back to a close distance, right? This is kind of bumping them up from underneath rather than knocking everybody over. Wild Thrashing is a new AoE attack, right? Spend a fear to move up to a close distance. Make an attack against every target in the path, right? Anyone that you intersect or come close to, when you do Wild Thrashing, you're making an attack against them. It is an attack, and so it will qualify for momentum. And any targets the attack succeeds against take 2d8 plus 4 damage and must make a strength reaction roll or be knocked back to a close distance and additionally mark a stress. Having 2 strength reaction rolls here emphasizes the incredible might of this form of the adversary, because you need high strength to be likely, or better than average chances of resisting all of these overwhelming effects. It's good to have reactions here. So when the Hive Eater takes severe damage from an attacker within very close, mark a stress to make a Flailing Claws attack, right? This is a counterattack. One of the ways that you can have a solo or boss adversary be able to keep up with a full party on their own is giving them additional prompts that let them interact with the scene, that let them push back against the characters. Whether that is a retaliation like this, or it is something where it's like, oh yeah, you hit them and now you're going to take damage because they're too hot or they're made of lava or whatever. Or in that phase 1, summoning the Withered Swarm. Phase 2 still has the momentum, and its last feature is Death Throes. When the Desperate Predator is defeated, it takes the spotlight to use Wild Thrashing, collapsing in a heap at the end of its movement after making attacks. This is a way where you can give this boss one last hurrah. It's not quite a blaze of glory for the villain, but it's sort of in that space. Always, with things like this, the menu of features is a menu you can order from. You don't necessarily have to use Death Throes if the way that the Hive Eater was dispatched is so cool that you don't want to add another beat to the fight after what was done. These are just options. Smendon redeemed a stretch. So now I do a stretch. Thank you. Hello and welcome, Not a Hag. So that's our second phase. We looked at the Wither Swarm. Here is the environment that goes with phase 2. The Hive Eater has to get back to the burrow, but if they do, then we apply, right, we activate this environment. We can start to spotlight it. I have a description that I used. Environments have impulses that kind of tell us what that space drives you to do or how it kind of manifests as if it were an agent within the story, even though it's not a living being, right? Offer refuge to the wounded beast, limit attackers' numbers, store food, right? Because it's a burrow and has a narrow entrance, you know, you can use that as a limitation if you want, but it's here, not in the features. I ended up using that, but that was just kind of maintaining and expressing the integrity of the fiction and the scene. Thank you, Dorset View. So those are some options. This is difficulty 12, so it's lower than the phase 2 difficulty of the adversary. The big thing here is it's dark in this cave. Rolls to attack or use sight at disadvantage are at disadvantage without a light source. This harvested treasures is mostly for when you've beaten the Hive Eater, right? You can get some rewards. Carrion Feast is the big thing that can swing this scene if the Hive Eater gets back to the burrow and then is able to take the spotlight. Once per scene, the Hive Eater sets upon a corpse it had set aside for later consumption or incubating its young, tearing into the meat to expedite its healing. It then clears 1d4 plus 1 hit points. In the session that I did, this got the Hive Eater 5 hit points back. So it was a big swing in the scene. Incubating Corpse will let you kind of add a Withered Swarm to the scene if you really want to, even though phase 2 doesn't have that reaction that creates swarms. And then Slip and Fall is a reaction you can utilize to emphasize that you're kind of in a muddy, dark space, right? On a failed action roll, they have to make an agility reaction or they fall over, right? On a failure, they mark a stress and become vulnerable until they next take the spotlight. So this just gives you a few extra options and the framework for describing how a combat becomes, right, a fight turns into a chase, turns into this cornered, desperate monster, right? It gives you some additional tools for heightening and getting more specific in what is happening in the scene. So that's my big boss encounter showcase. That is, of course, a Witherwild adversary, but now I want to take a little bit of time and build one or two new adversaries before my voice gives out for the day. So we're going to, let's not do that. Let's have it, let's take a little bit of formatting from this. So now I'm just going to grab the Withered Swarm and use its formatting. And we're going to jump up here. So in the promo material, right, I described mutated animals or plants, desperate wickling kind of renegades or revolutionaries, Havenite agents. I think the thing I most need for my campaign is more cool, weird, mutated, withered adversaries. So that's what we're going to do. The idea that I had was a withered ambush predator skulk. But to be weird, this is going to be a plant. We'll want to give it a cool Fanewick Wickling name. So let's do Snap Lily, right? This idea that it maybe looks like a lily, but now it has this other thing. Or Snare Lily. I think with the Witherwild, you could absolutely create an environment that feels more like an adversary because it is a part of the world, right? That the forest itself is trying to get you. And that could be really fun. I might do another stream to explore that space a little more directly. Here, we're going to express it more in a traditional fashion by having an adversary that is a skulk type that is going to try to isolate characters and kind of then put them into individual trouble. So I've got my Direwolf Tier 1 Skulk pulled up in the SRD for reference, because when I'm building adversaries, I'd like to try to stay pretty close to what is in the book in terms of looking at thresholds and difficulty and things like that. So I think this Snare Lily is going to be a difficulty 12. Its motives and tactics are definitely not going to be the same, right? So this is all different stuff. A mutated plant with innocuous roots that ensnare travelers and prey. That's a good basic description. Motives and tactics, right? Pose as a normal plant. Grab prey with roots and consume and grow, right? So this is a mixture of motives and tactics. All right. Yeah, I think flagging constrict or constrain itself is a really good note, Dorkside VO. So I'm going to take more of that wording from you. I think probably fewer HP for this. Stress 3, maybe we can leave that for now. This is going to be lashing roots, but it's going to have a +0 attack, right? It's going to be a little bit better. It's going to be better at hitting than those withered mosquitoes. The experiences here, I think, let's do blend in and I want something that can work for an attack. Merciless is pretty flexible, right? This is a plant. It is a part of nature. It's just doing what it does. It happens to have been mutated and turned into a bigger problem. let's say mutated plant. Here we can suggest some of that mutation, right? The size of a grown halfling, right? That's several feet tall. They've got the roots, so maybe I want to even go, you know, a grown elf. This is variable, right? I'm just trying to talk through my process. This enemy has the withered type and the withered tag. But for that to apply, they need to be able to do severe damage. I'm probably not going to try to do that with the base attack. We're going to be looking at some special feature, which is probably if they're ensnared, then they can do something that would hit harder. This is not a horde, so it doesn't have that feature. It's not flying, but I would say right, it is innocuous. It just looks like a plant. Right? It is harder to pick the snare lily out as a threat. Carpenter says maybe they can crit an ensnared target on a 19 or 20. That's certainly an option. I have not done much in the way of adversary features that modify crits like that, right? The Age of Umbra, Umbra-touched adversaries can crit on a 19 or 20, right? That's a rule that's in the campaign frame. So, right, it's in the design space already. Though, Age of Umbra is not in the SRD, right? So we're going to be cognizant of, like, oh, is this the only place where this shows up? Maybe we don't want to do that. But maybe that's me being more cautious than I need to be. I'm not a lawyer. So we have this passive. I think that we want at least one action. Living Trap maybe isn't as good of a phrase for the action that I'm trying to do. So let's say wrap and pull. So make an attack against a target within very close against. And this is actually, we're going to do lower damage. It's going to do 1d6 plus 3 as base damage. And this has a melee range, right? But wrap and pull has a bigger range. On success, the target takes 1d10 physical damage and is pulled into melee with the snare lily and becomes restrained. Right? A target may break free with a agility roll, or when the snare lily takes severe damage, right? You can hit it real hard and it'll let you go, or you can kind of wriggle your way free. This could be agility or finesse, depending on how you want to emphasize. You could also maybe do strength, or you could say the target may break free with an action roll, and you leave it really open. And I will say, now we're going to get a little bit gross. It's going to be fun. Here, I'm realizing I want this plant to have a big flower mouth. Massive floral maw. So the roots are the thing that ensnare, so I'm going to pull that. And then I put this in here. This is all just work in progress, right? It's not going to be polished. Cardboard Enjoyer, right? A lot of the reaction rolls ends up as agility, so there is definitely something to be said for leaving it open or going by something else, right? Maybe we do finesse for now on this one. Down the hatch. Here the idea is, because I wanted something that would kind of hit harder if the target is already restrained, right? This is like a two-step thing, right? Wrap and pull. They try to hit you, you take a little bit of damage, and they pull you in. And if they can then go again, they're going to try to use down the hatch. But notably, this adversary does not have Relentless. So that means that there is a natural pacing element to how this adversary can build toward its coup de grace type attack. Thank you, Cardboard Enjoyer. Right, so make spend a fear, right? Because this is a big, like the kind of big attack. I probably want to do spend a fear. We might do mark a stress because we don't have a stress ability now. I might do a reaction that includes a stress. Spend a fear and force a target, a restrained target within melee to make a... We could have this be another reaction roll, or we can do make an attack against a restrained target in melee. On a success, spend a fear, yada, yada, yada. This version is stronger because they only have to spend a fear on a success, depending on what that reaction roll is, right? If you have to spend a fear and then there's the chance that they avoid it, you might spend a fear and not end up having gotten a mechanical penalty or cost to the character. But maybe that's fine. This version is you make an attack, you can miss that attack. You had to use that move, that action. But you don't have to spend a fear, unless you hit. I think I want to stay with this way because I do want this to be a pretty, a notable threat, right? Spend a fear and the target to take, let's say, 2d10 damage and mark a stress. Right, so 2d10 physical damage against a tier 1 character has a good chance of doing severe damage. Is it a high enough chance of doing severe damage to try to kind of be that withered threat? Smedden asks, when is it okay to use direct damage? That's a great question. I was actually considering, should this be direct damage? But what I'm imagining is a maw, right? It is biting and crushing. Biting and crushing, to me, fictionally, don't automatically create direct damage. But I can adjust what this means in order to try to match have the fiction and the mechanics match to do direct damage. And what that would mean is that dissolves, right, softens and dissolves its prey. It's got goop in the middle there, right? Yeah, right, like a pitcher plant. Right, they're marking a stress because getting dissolved is stressful. Actually, we don't have to do bold here because bold is when it's a cost. But this should be direct physical damage. So we make an attack against a restrained target in melee. On a success, spend a fear and force the target to take 2d10 direct physical damage and mark a stress. That's nasty. Right? 2d10 direct physical damage. You can't use armor to reduce the severity. The average on 2d10 is 11. So any high average roll will deal severe damage to less armored characters at tier 1. And a high average damage roll will do severe damage even to more armored characters. And those more armored characters are going to be hit harder anyway because they're going to be used to being able to use armor. So Not a Hag asks, how does it attract prey to approach? Like Phoenix Flytrap has nectar. Maybe this one has something too. Cardboard Enjoyer mentioned something about a reaction with acid. These are both great options. I think I'm going to go with the second option. And we're going to have a feature called Scent Lure. Yes, and then we should have an experience. Right, enticing scent. Maybe the stress costing feature will help lock down other player characters to prevent them from helping the strained character. Interesting. So this is a fun thing about adversary design, right? As we dig in, as we build out an adversary, we can make features that all fit and support one another, because what we're trying to do is build a tool set that will help us overall create certain types of experiences, not mechanical Daggerheart experiences, but play experiences. What type of a scene will this adversary help create? Oh, okay, well, if it's about grabbing them and pulling them in and then dissolving them, okay, right, we're thinking about the beats of a scene and then thinking about whether we want features to accentuate, manifest, or modify those expected or unexpected beats in a scene. Cardboard Enjoyer out here playing a combined Witherwild Beast Feast campaign, which is great. Perfume rather than food, but that's where my mind went. So let's do Scent Lure and then decide if we want to add something else or change something. So when a PC moves within close range of the Snare Lily, they must make an instinct reaction roll or move into melee with the Snare Lily. The Scent Lure gets them to move within. We only need very close. So if they get to close, they may be enticed to come into very close, and then we can start our attack cycle, right? We have a pull, we have a grab, we have a dissolve. And because there is not relentless, we have a pacing system for how this adversary hunts. Lure is the first move. Wrap and pull is the second move. Down the hatch is the third move. There is time for the player character who is stuck or another player character to interrupt this cycle. And 2d10 direct physical damage is going to be nasty, but even if it deals severe damage, if the characters are not already beat up, it's not going to be a one-hit kill. But once they take 2d10 direct physical damage, they're sure going to not want to take that again. So that's going to increase the emotional intensity of their attempts to break free. Right? Because all they have to be is not restrained to not be kind of pulled down the hatch. They can be in melee, but if they're in melee, they might get grabbed again. This is 4 features. I would probably want to test the Snare Lily here. I think the acid reaction that Cardboard Enjoyer suggests is a great idea. I don't know that I'm going to apply it here, but you could always improvise it as a move in the scene, right? Because acidic fluids, right? It's in the text of the adversary that they have acidic fluids. So you can always improvise a move. If somebody, uses like a really chopping weapon and they deal severe damage to the adversary, you might say, I'm going to spend a fear to improvise a reaction, and you are doused with acid from the gullet of this plant. This might also be a way of signaling to the player characters, hey, the inside of this plant is acid. You don't want to get put in there. And Cardboard Enjoyer mentions another option where we could have a separate type of lily or a plant that grows alongside the snare lily that has a ranged attack. Right? We could have a whole encounter that was a skulk plant, a ranged plant, and like a bruiser plant. Right? We have mutated magic plants. We can do that. Now that we have kind of the full sense, I'm looking back at the other parts of this adversary to decide if I want to change anything, right? Blend in, enticing scent. Now that we change this to enticing scent, we don't have an experience that is necessarily immediately applicable to an attack, right? We could do predatory plant +2. Enticing scent, the GM could spend a fear and make that reaction roll harder because of the enticing scent, right? Emphasizing what they're able to do neurologically through your senses. Predatory plant, you could apply to their attacks. You could maybe even apply predatory plant to the reaction roll, or to the difficulty of the finesse roll needed to get out. Having those experiences gives you that latitude to press a little bit harder in certain circumstances when you need to emphasize those elements of what an adversary can do. 4 HP means that 2 solid hits will just take this thing out. I might even drop down to 3 hit points. Something I've been thinking about in my adversary design is a lot of adversaries don't necessarily need to take more than 1 hit, but they also don't have to be minions, right? An adversary that has 3 hit points, you will knock out of the scene, you will defeat if you do severe damage to them once. You don't always get to do severe damage straight off. So when you're building an adversary, think, how much staying power do I need them to have in this scene? And that can be one of the ways to decide how many hit points to give them. Especially if you're building something for a scene where you are not intending it to be like a full knockdown, drag out fight. Does this adversary need to be able to take a minimum of 3 hits? Like, 7 hit points, a minimum of 3 hits to kill them, right? You could do 3 hit points, and then any number. 4 hit points is minimum 2 hits, unless you're using the optional massive damage rule. But that then changes all of your damage math for building adversaries, so that you want to think about that. We don't currently have anything that uses stress. So we could say, putting mark of stress on this scent lure feature limits the number of times it can be applied in a scene. Right? Because if I do scent lure on each PC as they enter, maybe that becomes a little less fun. Having to mark a stress creates a little bit of a limiter on it. It means we probably won't be as likely to get into diminishing returns, right? It runs out of the most powerful scent. Exactly, Cardboard Enjoyer. Dorkside says, and now imagine a small clearing with a pond and a few of these around it and some thirsty PCs. Absolutely. Right? We could make an environment that goes with this that is kind of wilderness pond, right? Because we can make the environment neutral, or we can make an environment that is meant to include the snare lily as a threat, right? We could have convenient pond where the features include some of the stuff that we would have otherwise in the snare lily, right? You can sort of incorporate an adversary implicitly to the scene through an environment if that is an adversary that you're really not going to be focused on attacking directly. These are different ways of interpreting and applying certain types of threats and approaches in a story. Okay. I want to press on and try and do one more. We may not take as long with it, but I want to try and do one more. Let's do another kind of animal creature thing. Animal or plant. We've done a skulk. We've done a solo. There was the dimension of a ranged plant is an option. What about... I'm trying to think of like what types of things could mutate in order to have ranged attacks. So let's do modeled ranged plant with thorns. Yeah, I was thinking thorns. I was gonna go porcupine that hurls its thorns, but maybe let's do yeah, right, quills. So why don't we have names are always fun, right? So this is needler, right? It's something needler. And this is going to be a tier 1 withered ranged adversary. And then I'm just going to copy stuff and I'm going to bring them down to their own page so it's easier to follow. Right, and so this is a mutated porcupine that shoots its spines at prey, paralyzing them. Okay, so we already have some ideas, right? Porcupine shoots spines that are then paralyzing. Paralyzing is a thing that lots of animals in our world want to be able to do their targets because it just makes a target easier to get. All right, this is very straightforward. So that is lie in wait, disable with spines, gather food for the long night, right? So this needler is going to be a diurnal animal, right? They go out and about during the week of day, but now the Witherwild, right, in the Witherwild campaign frame, in the setting, you have day that lasts a week and then night that lasts a week. So this animal wants to hunt and gather enough food so that it can stay home during the week of night. Let's do a slightly lower difficulty. We're going to make him a little tougher at the end, but only 3 hit points. So 1 strong hit, if you get up to that 11, is going to be able to take them out. 11 damage is pretty hard to hit at level 1, but it's doable, and especially doable with a crit, right? But we're going to give them a +1 attack and Stinging Needle with a range of close. And this is going to be 1d8, but +1. Right? The average is going to be a little lower, but the top end is not too bad. Now I'm going to benchmark this against other tier 1 adversaries. Archer Guard is D8 plus 3. Jagged Knife Sniper is 1d10 plus 2. So this is a little on the lower end, but I think because we're going to have this paralysis thing, that's probably fine. And I think Stinging Needle suggests that maybe targets will mark a stress when they're hit by the needle because of the stinging element. And let's see. Experiences, sense of smell plus 2, and ambusher plus 2. Right? Ambusher can be used on offense. And now we're going to do some features, right? I think as a starting point, 1 passive, 1 action, 1 reaction is a decent framework. So passive, this is going to be paralyzing spines, right? This is just a thing that exists. Like, they're just how this exists, right? A PC that marks HP from a stinging needle attack must mark HP. You can mark armor without getting the effects as the needles get stuck on you. That is awesome and terrible. Maybe that's going to be the reaction, right? Protective, right? As a reaction, you get hit by the needles. An attack within melee, the attacker must mark an armor slot as the needles, as several needles stab into them, right? The needler kind of shreds up your armor when you hit it. Okay. That means that I probably want this attack to have a stress cost or maybe a fear cost. So we know the spines are paralytic. They make you mark HP. And we have the protective spines. So the action we probably want to be paralyzing spines, mark a stress. Yes, mark stress. Thank you, Cardboard Enjoyer. I toggled it in my brain for unknown reasons. Because I had just said marked HP. So it was just still top of mind. And let's see. What if they had a big hug? They hug you and stab you. Now, this is a ranged adversary, so maybe I don't want that. So maybe I do... I could do a different version of the Needler that's not arranged, and maybe that one would have the embrace. So what I'm going to say is, let's emphasize the adversary type that it is, right? This is spend a fear. No, this is just going to be mark a stress. To force all targets within very close to make a distinct reaction roll or take 1d, let's do 2d6 damage and mark a stress. Well, importantly, Paralyzing Spines says from a stinging needle attack, that is the standard attack. Spine spray is not that same thing, so we're going to repeat this thing. Why instinct rather than agility? Great question. There's a few different ways we could look at this, right? Agility reaction rolls are very common. I am conscious of not wanting agility to become a super stat in Daggerheart, the way that in some fantasy adventure games, dexterity or something like it just becomes the stat you never want to dump because there's so many things that require dexterity saving throws. This is a wild animal doing a wild animal behavior. Instinct might be able to identify the beginning of the spine spray attack and give yourself the moment to get out of the way. We could say a agility or instinct reaction roll, right? Is it more about the movement or is it more about seeing it coming? Or this could just be a straight attack, right? It could be mark a stress and make an attack against all targets within very close. Any targets the attack succeeds against take this much damage and must mark a stress. We could certainly go that way. Phoebus, yeah, I think if you're building an adversary that is meant to be a part of a broader challenge and you don't have a fear feature for them, often that is going to be fine. I think if an adversary doesn't have any features that cost stress or fear, it's probably fine to give them something that just costs stress because that's still going to be a limiter on them, and the GM can always improvise fear moves. Not a hag asks, is there a way to codify narrative appropriate reaction roll up to PC and DM discretion? I think the closest language in Daggerheart, in the Daggerheart grammar, would be must make a reaction roll using a trait of their choice, or using a trait of their choice is probably the best wording. The fiction, right? If I say, oh, well, I use strength. Well, how do you use strength, right? We have to begin and end with the fiction, but I could see a character saying like, oh, it's shooting spines at me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of like flex and I'm going to like be big in my armor so that the spines like kind of hit the armor, but don't kind of pierce into me. Or a strength reaction roll is about being so tough they can't pierce you. Okay, maybe that works. Is it a knowledge reaction roll to be like, this thing is a mutated porcupine. I know what porcupines do. I know what is going to be coming, and so I know to get out of the way. So that's a knowledge reaction roll. A presence reaction roll might be a little bit more different, but maybe, right? Like, are you trying to talk the thing down? That's gets a little trickier because why is that just protecting you and not everybody? But, you can figure it out. Are we likely to do severe damage with this adversary? That is a great question that I was just thinking about, right? We could add a reaction that makes their attacks deal extra damage if they hit. We could figure out a way to make it make sense to increase the damage on something, or we could increase the damage on this attack. We could add a feature that will let you add damage to one of these things. So maybe we do when the needler succeeds with a stinging needle attack, the target suffers an additional 1d10. And this you spend a fear for. Right? So you're emphasizing that for this attack, the Witherwild has changed the Needler's spines so that it's more deadly. Right? If we add 1d10 physical damage to 1d8, 1d8 plus 1d10, that's got a pretty good chance of doing severe damage. Right? 1d8 average is 5.5. Or sorry, 1d10 average is 5.5. 1d8 average is 4.5. So that's an average of 10-ish. It has a +1. Pretty good chance of dealing severe damage to a number of targets. If this isn't high enough and you really want to focus on being able to deal that nastier damage, you might say an additional 2d6 damage, because an average on 2d6 is 7. So adding an average of 7 to your attack, that brings up the spread of where the damage is going to be. And 2d6 plus 1d8, the maximum there is 20, and with a +1, the max is 21. Does it mean the spines keep getting deeper into you and do more damage on your next action unless you mark a stress to remove them? I was thinking with the Witherwarp spine that this one attack deals more damage, because if you suffer damage from multiple sources during one GM move, those damage values are combined before they are applied against your damage thresholds. Right? So they attack, they hit with Stinging Needle. The GM spends a fear and says, this is going to be, it's going to deal an additional 2d6 physical damage. But they have to spend a fear every time they do that, and they still have to hit. And this attack only has a +1. Just cleaning up my language here. So we have 2 reactions. We could probably make Witherwarped Spine a passive if we wanted, because it's kind of it's always an option. I'm fine having this be a reaction because it takes a little bit of additional focus, right? It's a very intentional choice kind of a thing. I'm not super happy with the wording on the Protective Spines feature, but I think that's going to have to be enough. We are almost an hour 40 into the stream, so this is one of the longest streams that I've done for the Daggerheart stuff. I wanted to keep going to do a little bit of new adversary design on top of showing off my Hive Eater. I'm very happy with that adversary encounter set, but I wanted to do a little bit more live homebrew with everybody. Right, with these adversaries in the Witherwild, right, we're trying to accomplish very specific things, right? The Needler was, how can we have this type of a ranged adversary? The Snare Lily was, we want a plant that's a skulk, and then we thought about like, oh, well, how can we make them do severe damage? How can we make this more dangerous? How can we build out the narrative of how this adversary presents a threat? Talking ourselves through the fictional applications of an adversary and using that to inform our mechanical choices, I think is a great approach for building Daggerheart adversaries, because to me it feels so much in keeping with the design philosophy that is baked in and that we see in terms of the player and GM principles, the best practices, and so on. So that has been some new adversaries. I will remind folks that you can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/MichaelRUnderwood. Paid subscribers get access to a bunch of additional homebrew and essays and writing on Daggerheart and various other things, right? There's at $2 and up, you get some pictures of my cute dog Oreo, who is now a distinguished old gentleman dog. And then at even higher levels, there's extra bonuses. When I start releasing full PDFs of Daggerheart compatible material, subscribers at those higher levels will get those releases automatically, but those will then come to retail and at places like DriveThruRPG and probably itch.io, because Itch is still there. It has a lot of an audience. I'm not happy with the payment processor stuff, but a lot of that pressure is coming from these outside conservative groups being put on the payment processors, and the retailers like itch.io especially just doesn't have the scale to be in as good a place to push back against that. And so I'm angry at Itch for buckling. I think it's important to be more angry at the payment processors for buckling to then that pressure from these far-right conservative groups. And we live in a screwed up, compromised, bad economic system. And so maybe I have to eat crow a little bit and accept that I'm going to put my stuff back up on itch.io even when I was complaining about stuff. Anyway, that's a small digression. Apologies for that. I am very glad that Oreo Pictures made your week. Not a hag. That makes me happy. And thank you to all of y'all for hanging out and watching live. So thanks to Dorkside VO, Not a Hag, Pathfinder PhD, Cardboard Enjoyer, Phoebus, Smenden, Alan Tucker. Trying to get everybody here. Knights of the Last Call, DM Rawlings, and Blackheart Bry, as well as Machine Age Productions. Thank you. And Dorkside VO. I apologize if I may have mentioned you twice. But thanks so much, everybody live. Thank you to folks who are watching later on YouTube. On YouTube, you can subscribe and, click the bell thing if you want to be notified immediately when I have new videos. If you cannot wait to hear me talk about Daggerheart more, I would encourage you and invite you to do that, because it feeds the almighty algorithm and then shows my videos to more people, which is great for me because that helps me kind of share my thoughts and ideas about the game and draws in folks who are interested in hearing more, which then leads to Patreon support and things like that, so that I can pay my bills, keep my lovely little dog Oreo in kibble, and all that kind of good stuff. There probably won't be another stream this week because, as you can tell, my voice is tired, so I should probably give it a break. But more Daggerheart things are absolutely ahead from me. And until then, I will say adieu, thank you, and take care. Where's my ending? Here it is. Okay.